and welcome to Changing the Ovarian Cancer Story, a podcast from the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition. Together, we're shining a light on the most lethal of female cancers. We'll discuss the realities of ovarian cancer, the challenges and disparities, but also the progress and the successes, both big and small. Each episode, we're going to hear from survivors, advocates, clinicians, global healthcare leaders. We want to reach all of those affected directly and indirectly, but also policymakers. Because by sharing stories and raising awareness, yes, we can, to borrow a phrase, change the ovarian cancer story for good. I'm your host, Hannah Vaughan Jones, and it's so wonderful to have you here with me. In this first episode, we're looking at the big picture and speaking to two women with vast experience of the ovarian cancer story so far. One through more of an advocacy lens and the other from a patient perspective. Both are going to extraordinary efforts to change the ovarian cancer story in a world where, let's face it, women's health simply doesn't get the same amount of investment or attention as men's. So let's get straight to it. Clara MacKay is the CEO of the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition. That's the only advocacy organization that's solely focused on ovarian cancer. And Clara's joining us from Canada. Sbba Siddique is the director and presenter at Asian Star Community Radio in the UK. And she is also an ovarian cancer thriver. Welcome, Clara and Sbba. And with thriving in mind, perhaps we can just kick things off by me asking how you both are.
Hi, Hannah. Yep, I'm absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for having me on. Really excited to have this conversation.
Well, it's great to hear from the patient that you're absolutely brilliant. Clara, how are you feeling?
I'm really well. Thank you, Hannah. Hi, Sbba. Really lovely to see you both. I'm delighted to be here and excited to be kicking off this podcast. The World Ovarian Cancer Coalition has a story to tell, and the ovarian cancer community has a amazing story to tell. And so through this podcast, I'm just really excited to be sharing that story with the world. So wonderful to be here.
Well, no pressure as my first guests, but we want to keep these conversations to be collaborative, informative, inclusive. So I will do my very best to keep my interrogation tactics at bay for now. Clara, let me start with you then. This podcast is called Changing the Ovarian Cancer Story. Why does it need changing?
Oh, it's such a good question. Well, ovarian cancer has really suffered the way many less common and more difficult to treat cancers have, of just being under-resourced, significantly focused on. There hasn't been the focus, the investment. There's always been a community of committed patient advocates, organizations, clinicians trying to make a change. But for many, many years, and I mean many, many years, probably until about almost 10 years ago, the story was kind of stuck at chapter 1, that there was no screening, difficult to diagnose, very few treatments, very, very limited treatments. So, it was heart-wrenching, actually, to be in this field and to see a cancer that affects so many women with such profound impact not being addressed.
And Sbba, I want to come to you, of course, in just a second, but I think it's critical you said about it being back at chapter 1. Was that because there are just too many misconceptions about what ovarian cancer is and how it manifests? Or is it just that the story, the awareness was just so low that people just didn't know?
Sure. So it had been stuck in chapter 1 for a whole series of reasons, and you've touched on a couple of very important ones, just in terms of awareness of the disease. So we are and continue to be faced with a really significant challenge around women's health literacy, quite frankly, and actually physicians' health literacy about women and particular gynecologic issues. So you start with this sort of low level of communication and acknowledgement of a disease. So women have very low awareness. Physicians aren't kind of teed up. But it's also a very difficult disease to treat. So we don't have a screening test. The symptoms are a little vague, so it becomes harder to diagnose. women survival rates are quite poor. And then the combination of that kind of creates a sense of nihilism around a disease, that there is no point in trying to do more, that it's such a big problem to overcome. And we don't hear a lot about it. It's not on the front pages of newspapers. And so it kind of all comes together and really acts as a way of slowing down progress. But going back to one of my starting point about a really committed, active community, what we've seen in the last number of years have been some really important advances in understanding the disease and in treatment. And then you start to create an enthusiasm and an ambition. So one of the things that I always say is we just need to be more ambitious for women with ovarian cancer. And I see that happening. So we're progressing through beyond chapter 1. There's a long way to go, but it's a big challenge that our community is trying to tackle.
Enter this podcast, and here we are trying to
enter this podcast. Quite
trying to get rid of some of these misconceptions and also build awareness as well. And Sbba, as Clara was talking there, I could see you kind of nodding along. I mean, tell us, if you can, you said at the beginning that you're feeling great today, which we're so grateful for, because we know that you have yourself been experiencing ovarian cancer. You've gone through this and you're still going through it, I'm sure, in many ways. How are you? And tell us a little bit about when the cancer was first diagnosed. And I guess one of the misconceptions would be that there's only one type of ovarian cancer, but I understand there's lots of different types. So perhaps you can give us a bit of detail about what specifically you were diagnosed with.
Thanks, Hannah. Yes, I'm doing good. Today's a good day, but every day isn't, because that's just the nature of the beast. It's very, very much having to take life a day at a time and being really intentional with how I actually plan my week out. And there is a very small window of spontaneity left because I have to manage fatigue. Many people look at me because I went through a very difficult treatment pathway, and even when I look back at photographs of myself, I don't recognize who that person is, because that was just somebody completely different. And I have lost a little bit of weight, hopefully, and the hair's grown back. I had a really tough time with one of the meds that gave me a rash. Now the rash is all cleared up, and people say to me, "Wow, you look great. You can put it all behind you." And that's the last thing I can do, because whether that's physically, mentally, or emotionally, it is always, always there. My diagnosis was 6 months in the making, and it was traumatic because I was continually just going back and forth with my GP, who was just dismissing me as a woman in her 50s, and because the symptoms were so vague, as a menopausal woman. Now, in hindsight, now that I know a lot more about ovarian cancer, the signs and the symptoms, I would have been at my GP's door banging it down like a shot, if it was me today. But at that point, because of the lack of awareness, I had no clue on what, when I was diagnosed, I didn't even know what ovarian cancer was. I'd never even heard of it. I thought I was being such the good person because I was going for that smear test every single time the letter came. And I thought, I've done my bit and I'm doing my advocacy for myself and I'm taking care of my health. But little did I know that doesn't pick up anything else apart from cervical cancer. And I think that's a misconception many women have, because after my diagnosis, having that conversation with friends, that's exactly what many others think. The point of getting a diagnosis was really slow. As I say, it took me 6 months to get my GP to take me seriously. It was only when I was seen by another clinician for something completely unrelated that she encouraged me to go and be a bit of a drama queen and get myself seen, because up until that point, I had just had e-consults or telephone consults. Nobody had physically seen me. And by this time, I was so bloated that I looked like I was 6 months pregnant. And so lots of what ifs come to my mind. What if they'd seen me earlier? What if someone had seen my stomach? What if? But we can carry on doing all of that. And this is why, from my perspective on how I was dismissed, how there was the medical gaslighting, and how I just wasn't adequately prepared myself to be able to advocate, the awareness is so, so important.
Do you mind me asking how long ago the diagnosis happened? Because you said it took a 6-month period, but how many years or months ago was it?
Okay, so I started to feel generally unwell in the summer of 2022, and it progressively got worse. By Christmas, I was at that stage where I was absolutely huge, and I was diagnosed in March of 2023.
And it's interesting to me that you use that phrase, being a drama queen. You know, it's again, it's something that's a gendered term that's for women, and this is, you know, somehow it seems that women, in order to advocate for ourselves and actually look after ourselves, we have to suddenly be more hysterical or be, you know, put on a show somehow. And you really had to do that because,
Yeah.
you know, it took that long for people to take you seriously, even when you know, you might not have been banging down the door, but, you know, I'm the same as you. I would go for my 3
Yeah.
yearly screening tests and pap tests and smear tests and things. And I guess there is still that assumption, isn't there, that covers you, that that's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that had this other doctor not encouraged me, I would have probably, even at that point, just mistrusted myself and my gut and just believed what my doctor was saying. Because after all, they're the clinicians, they're the experts. I'm not. And hadn't, that doubt not been planted in my head by this other doctor, who knows how much longer it would have taken for me to get a diagnosis.
And Clara, I mean, I mentioned in the introduction that it's considered one of the most lethal of female cancers. And, you know, let's face it, ovarian cancer just doesn't get the same attention as, say, breast cancer. Women's cancers don't get the same amount of attention as men's cancer. It's quite an infuriating landscape. Is there a reason why ovarian cancer has been so overlooked?
Well, I think, and Sbba, you've touched on so many important kind of themes in your story, and we hear it all the time. And, the backdrop to this is just societally, we place low priority on women's health. And we also do not empower women with an understanding of their own health, and again, in particular, gynecologic cancers. And also, Sbba, it's so interesting that you said about your understanding or knowledge of ovarian cancer. And through our studies that we've done, and we have data now from 4,000 women from around the world in all income settings from over 60 countries, and we ask, and these are women who are living with a diagnosis of ovarian cancer, and we ask, what did you know prior to your diagnosis? So we have a huge proportion of our global female population, which is 50% of the world's population, who are not aware, who aren't, don't have the information in order to be empowered to act.
Now, you mentioned like one study that the coalition's done. I know the coalition's been doing lots and lots of studies and producing reports recently. It does sort of buy into that kind of sense of urgency that something needs to happen now. I was reading before about Globocan predicting that by, in the next quarter of a century, more than 8 million women could die from this disease if action isn't taken. And you mentioned about lower middle income countries as well. 70% of those diagnosed with ovarian cancer will come from lower middle income countries. So it's that awareness, isn't it? And that the certain, maybe a stigma as well that's attached to ovarian cancer as opposed to something else.
Absolutely. There's a stigma. There's a stigma around all kind of gynecologic health issues and anatomy and I always feel in higher income countries we feel a little at least superior in terms of being informed, and our health systems look so much different and very sophisticated messaging.
It's like a naive arrogance, isn't it?
There's a naive arrogance. And, there's something that, there are some common threads about ovarian cancer that cut through wherever you are in the world. And one of those common themes is just this is the result of a low level of health literacy around women's health, about, societal systems that prioritize male health over female health. We see it in research investment. So that's something that, as a global community with an interest in women's health, this goes beyond ovarian cancer. As a global community, we need to push back push back about that on that kind of importance of improving health literacy and do something about it. But I also feel, and here's the irony, and we know this is evidence-based as well, women are the health conscious people in their families. They are looking out all the time, scanning all the time the health of their family members and making sure that those individuals in their families, their partners and children and parents are asking questions, getting to the healthcare professionals they need to get to. And yet when it comes to our own health, we are our own worst enemy. We deprioritize, we don't educate ourselves. Sbba, you're absolutely right. When you put yourself in front of a healthcare professional and you talk about the symptoms of ovarian cancer, the tendency to say,
Yeah.
you're off a woman of a certain age.
Yeah.
This is, menopausal, postmenopausal, premenopausal, and so go home and, suck it up, basically.
Yeah. And this is why education, knowledge is power. This is why women need to be able to self-advocate. And yes, having the tools is great, but we also need to empower them with the confidence to use those tools.
Correct. I couldn't agree more.
And a lot of the stuff you said, Clara, you've hit the nail on the head. But as a woman of color, there are more layers.
Yes.
Because I was accessing a system that was never designed with people of color in mind. I was then facing the gaslighting that, okay, it's just menopause, you're a woman. But then I've got to look at my own community and how difficult cancer conversations are within the South Asian community. When you talk about anything that's below the waist, that's completely taboo. There are so many stigmas around talking about that. So even general conversations between women, peer to peer, they don't very often happen. And this is where, women end up being diagnosed so late. They end up in A&E because it's all multi-layered. We put ourselves at the bottom of the list. We don't trust our gut. We put everybody else before us. We're not equipped with information. We don't have the tools. And even if we have the tools, we don't know how to use them properly. And then you end up like me with a stage 3C diagnosis.
We jumped very quickly from talking specifically about your story, than the micro picture, and looking at the macro picture. And I'd love to bring us back, Sbba, to your story in particular as well.
Sure.
You mentioned there about knowledge is power, but knowledge is also terrifying for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. 100% it can be. And one of the first things that I did when I was initially diagnosed, as I say, I had no history of cancer in my family and I had no knowledge of ovarian cancer. And I am the kind of person who's very logical and I want to know what's going on. I want to be a full participant in that process. And so I went away onto Google and ended up down quite a few rabbit holes and learned very, very quickly that there are only certain sites that I should be going to and be getting my information from. And I was very strict around that. So I looked at ovarian cancer charities, World Ovarian Cancer Coalition being one of them, looking at the NICE website, Macmillan website, and the NHS website. And that's what I stuck to. And the right information is what will empower you. But what we need to do is ensure that women have immediate access to that. So within when I was diagnosed, when I was given my official diagnosis, I was handed a pile of books. And the pile of books were all around nutrition, around health, around diet, around exercise, around, what does chemotherapy involve, and all of that fun stuff that I was just about to embark on. But those books are still there 3 years later, because when I opened them up on the first few days after getting my diagnosis, I saw nobody that looked like me. Visibility and representation is so important for women to be able to relate to the literature that is out there. We need to ensure, and I talk about my diagnosis through my South Asian lens. I don't have any other lens to look at. And, so I needed to see people that looked like me, people who had had the same experiences as me, people who had the same cultural nuances as I did, but also religious nuances, because my faith played an absolutely huge role, not only in treatment, but also in my recovery. So yes, information is important, but women need to be able to have access to the right information.
It's so key, isn't it? I wonder, Clara, if you think that at a very, very base level, is it that the lack of awareness that is the biggest driving factor in this increase in the number of deaths from ovarian cancer that the various studies are are suggesting?
So the increase in cases of ovarian cancer will be fueled by a few things, including growing populations, and also as populations adopt more Western style kind of lifestyle habits. So those factor in. The awareness bit impacts on diagnosis and how quickly women are diagnosed. I think more if you don't have a diagnosis, it's hard to, you know, do anything with that. And just to illustrate a little bit, and these are studies that are from high income countries like the UK, but there are, the evidence shows, let's talk about evidence. The evidence shows that in some countries, and these are high income, that 20% of women with ovarian cancer are diagnosed so late in their ovarian cancer illness that they only access palliative care. There is no surgery, there is no chemo, there is no access to something that could potentially change the outcome of your disease. And so, and for me, it keeps me awake at night. I lie in bed at night and I think, is it possible in these countries that have such insight and expertise and knowledge and wealth that 20% of a population of women cancer patients are given a diagnosis when they probably have weeks to live? And that's, for me, kind of goes right to the heart. What is the impact of our lack of awareness? What is the impact of our lack of empowerment? What is the impact of the lack of priority on women's health? And that is the impact. Women die. That is the impact. It's the 8 million women by 2050 will die if we do nothing.
And if this is the role of advocacy, right? And Sbba, I know that you've been hugely active whilst also going through your treatment and being there for your family and working in your career and all the rest of it. You're also now an amazing advocate for this. Have you met other people of South Asian origin who are also kind of affected by ovarian cancer? Have you been able to help and advocate for your community as well
but with
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've met some amazing, inspirational women on my journey. They're also doing some great advocacy work themselves. And I think the important thing for me, those connections have been so valuable in order to amplify our voices. We women experience, late diagnosis. They are, as Clara says, many are at a stage where there is not an awful lot that can be done. But even those stages, whatever, late stage you're diagnosed at, you still need information. You still need to know what your options are. You need to know the path, because many people come to this with no knowledge whatsoever at whatever stage. Empowerment looks also like a challenge, because I have to challenge not only a healthcare system that is, and I hate to use the word inadequate, because although I was so late in being diagnosed, once I did get my diagnosis, the NHS were absolutely amazing. The people that work within the system are absolutely amazing. My CNSs, my surgical team, my oncology team, I have the utmost love, respect, and praise for them, because I was taken care of so well. It was just getting to that stage that was the hard bit.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it was stage 3 by the time you got the diagnosis. Was that right?
I was stage 3C. And mine was also one of the rarer types of ovarian cancer. I was low-grade serous, which is a very, very slow-growing type of ovarian cancer. And treatment was rough. Treatment was absolutely rough. But my nurses were absolutely amazing. Hospital staff, all amazing. The problem was getting me there. And I think that's what the difficult part is. The other side, when I say challenge, is about challenging my community. It's about challenging them to be open and a little bit more open about these conversations, so that we can move past, the embarrassment of, we're talking about those words that we can't say, a clitoris, a vagina, an ovary. These are medical terms. Problem is that many minority communities consider the female form first and foremost sexually. We need to move past that. We need to move past that, because women are losing their lives. Women are being diagnosed late. Women are having to go through such invasive treatments because they are being diagnosed so late. So let's wake up. And that was the other challenge of my advocacy work. It's a two-way street. It is about challenging the health inequalities that exist in the healthcare system, but it's also about challenging minority communities to do better, to let's talk about these, let's have open and frank conversations. Because when we start doing that, That's when these conversations become a little bit normal, and we're able to have a sensible discussion around how we can improve outcomes for women, how we can educate them, and how we can build trust. Because a lot of the reasons behind communities like mine not engaging is because of a lack of trust. It's a lack of trust because of things that have gone on historically.
Yes.
And COVID was for us here in the UK, COVID was a great example of that because of the disproportionate amount of deaths of people from the minority communities. There is that lack of trust. So that's why the advocacy work at grassroots is so important, because those are, working alongside the grassroots organisations here in the UK, those are the ones that have the ear of the population. They're the ones that have the ear of the people, so that they've already built the trust. They've already had those conversations and relationships, and it's building on those. And that's why the advocacy work that I love, is connecting with all of these different organizations to amplify our voices, because the more of us that are shouting, they're going to have to listen.
Yeah, well, I hope that you got a load of support from the community once you could suddenly talk to people outside of your family about it. And I'm sure the work that you've done so far is going to be making a huge difference, no doubt.
I hope
But tell
so.
me a little bit about your family as well, because we advocate for ourselves and we advocate for the organizations that we align with. But also, I know you're a mum of 2 girls.
Yes, yeah.
So presumably they were first forefront in your mind as well when it came to not only your fighting this, but also then surviving it and then going on and advocating for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a son and 2 daughters.
Okay.
My husband and my family were my absolute rock through the 18 months of treatment that I experienced. There was something that I did right. Actually, it was the day that I was diagnosed, and I walked out of that consultation. We sat in the car, and I made a conscious decision just to myself. Nobody knew. And I just had this thought in my head that, you know what, it doesn't matter what happens. They are going to be involved every step of the way with me on this journey, because they need to know. They need to know too. When things got really, really tough, and they did get very, very tough at one point, and it was to the point where, I actually wanted treatment and life to end, because I was bedbound. I could not, I was unconscious half of the time. I wasn't able to speak. I wasn't able to go to the bathroom myself. I couldn't advocate for myself, because I had kept them involved, because I had involved them in every step, told them my every wish in every kind of scenario. They became my biggest advocates. They advocated for me when I couldn't. But they were also my biggest cheerleaders, just encouraging me, grounding me, and, helping me to take it each step at a time. When I went through what I did with treatment, the only thought that continued to go round my head is that I would never want any other woman to go through this. And I want my daughters to have better options. I want my daughters to be better educated, and I want them to be able to advocate for themselves better and know how to do it. And that's where my advocacy, my passion for advocating really came from, because the statistics, as I was learning more about ovarian cancer, and I was learning more about cancer generally, the statistics were absolutely frightening. Completely frightening. I mean, we are at a stage now when 1 in 2 of us will receive a cancer diagnosis. So if it's not you, it's going to definitely be somebody that you love. And we, at this point, have to do whatever that we can do to ensure that those that are inevitably going to follow don't go through what we have had to go through. Those outcomes have to be different for them.
Mm. And those stages of advocacy as well. Would you ask your daughters, for example, and Clara, a question to you as well, would you ask young women today to be drama queens? Be the drama queen right now.
Yes.
Do it. And then hopefully
Yes.
the policy makers, the policy changes over time, so that you don't
Yeah.
have to then go and be a drama queen. But in this sort of crucial time now, where there is this chronic lack of awareness.
Yeah. There's 2 things I'd ask my girls to do, or I'd ask any woman to do, is number 1, you know your body better than absolutely anybody else. And when you feel that something is wrong, no matter how trivial you think it might be, because we as women, like Clara mentioned earlier on, we take care of everybody else and we ignore ourselves.
Yeah.
And even when we reach the top of the list, we put ourselves back down at the bottom because, somebody else is more important. Trust your gut, know you're normal, and seek help and advice. And number 2, yes, be insistent, be firm. You're not asking for anything that's out of your bounds or out of your rights. You have the right for healthcare, but you also have the right to ask for a second opinion if you are still not satisfied. And these are all the things that I didn't know and I've had to learn as I'm going through treatment. So that's the two things that I would push any woman to do. Trust your gut, go and seek help.
And Clara?
Yeah, I would add on the advocacy piece that Sbba's just very so eloquently talked about that. We need role models. So we learn
Yeah.
from role models. And I think we have to model for younger women the behaviors and the empowerment that we wish for them to have. And it only comes, I think, from the voices of people like Sbba who are respected within their community, but in Sbba's case, nationally and globally, those champions, those women that make it okay to speak about something that, people don't want to speak about. And, I don't consider myself a terribly elderly person, but I remember when the first tampon advert, or it may have even just been for pads, came on TV. That was not
No.
that long ago, and it was a
Yeah.
huge
Huge.
news story. That's where that's how ridiculous it would be. Like we've only started advertising socks
Yeah.
or, it's so you sort of, we've come a long way, but I do feel, you know, do not be afraid. Know what's normal for you. Absolutely, Sbba. We get caught up in the symptoms are vague and they could be anything else. Of course they could be, and they're probably not ovarian cancer. But what don't be talked out of is, I know this isn't right for me.
Exactly.
I know that this has been going on long enough that it isn't just I got up on Monday morning as a little bloated and so I raced off to my doctor. This is not what's happening. It's women are saying, here's a collection of things that all don't seem right.
Right.
And they've been going on. And I would encourage women actually to make notes, when you start to, because you will get pushback when when you're sitting across that desk in your physician's office. Quite often you will be pushed back on the significance of your symptoms. And here's the really frustrating thing in high income countries in particular. It's not like you're asking your physician to spend $1 million on a big test. It's pretty basic stuff. It's a CA 125, not expensive at all. It's a transvaginal ultrasound. It's a physical examination. These are not big spend ticket items for our healthcare systems. So, that women don't get that diagnosis sooner. And what I've experienced, and Sbba, when you said, you were, your stomach was extended, I've heard this story so many times. People are saying, I looked like I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And still someone's trying to tell me that this is in my head, or this is a totally, one of the advocates that we worked with was told by her doctor, go to a spin class. Like, this is what's honestly.
It's frightening. It's really frightening especially when you realize how common these kind of stories are as well.
Very, very frightening. Totally unnecessary.
I'll tell you a crazy story just going on from what you were saying, Clara. When I started to do the advocacy work, I did a lot of attending female well-being days, health events, speaking, keynote and all of that. And in the first 3 or 4 of these events, I had women in the audience come up to me afterwards and tell me thank you. And I was like a little bit confused. And I said, well, thank you for what? Which bit? The information or what I was talking about, sharing my story. I couldn't get it. And they were, thank you for giving me the permission to talk about these things.
Yes.
That was crazy to me because, these women felt that they weren't even allowed to talk about their health because it was gynae related.
And that's the key thing, is because it's gynae related as well. Because I think self-care is so much in our vernacular these days that everyone talks about it. But it's like, how much do we actually, we're not just talking about doing a spin class, or going to yoga. We're talking about actually taking care of everything top to bottom that's going on. And that's maybe the bit that's missing. We've had some amazing advice there to women, like how to advocate for yourself. But I mentioned in the introduction to this episode as well that we really want to reach policymakers as well, because to really move move the needle on this, we have to reach the policymakers. And Clara, I want to ask you specifically about this. Like, what would you say to a policymaker at a global level, perhaps listening to this? Because there is not only the moral imperative to make a difference on ovarian cancer stats, as we've just been hearing, but there's an economic imperative as well, right?
There's a huge, exactly. So the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition, the organization I work for, we have, one of our kind of cornerstones of what we do is filling evidence gaps. We can make the moral case. We are so good at it. Like, we have examples, we have case studies, we have, data about the projected increases. But we realized at some point that actually we're prepared to make the economic case as well. And so we commissioned some work which basically quantified the impact of ovarian cancer. We looked at 11 countries, 4 high income, 7 low to middle income, so a good cross section. And we quantified the impact of ovarian cancer on healthcare systems, on productivity, on caregivers, on national economies. And what we found, the high level kind of killer stats are that just those 11 countries in 1 year, $70 billion US, what was the total loss to those countries by through ovarian cancer. And a significant proportion of that cost related to the future, the lost value of those lives in terms of useful contribution to society. Not just, and I've talked to physicians and many and very kind of high-level physicians. And when we started talking about this study around quantifying the cost and the economic impact, we were told by at least 2, in the nicest possible way, that here's the problem. It's women of a certain age. They're probably not working. If they are, they're at the end of their, yeah. So, right. So now, basically, I find that I was so outraged, to be completely honest, so outraged. If I had to do that work myself, I would have, because I'm like, I'm in the cohort. I work. And, the women we talk to work. They are not just knitting tea cozies and, making baked goods for the local sale. They're contributing in a hugely significant way to economies. And if that's the talk we need to talk to shift policymakers, then we're prepared to do it. And that is some of the data we use to influence our global policymakers that really need to move ovarian cancer up a notch or 2 in terms of priority.
And Sbba, I'm sure that this resonates with you. When you were going through treatment, presumably this has had a huge impact not only on your family, your finances, but also your sense of purpose as well, in terms of your career and your job, and then your role within your family in terms of looking after other people, suddenly not being the caregiver, but being the cared for person as well, and the economic impact that just has just on you and your family as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And Clara, those figures don't just surprise me, but what does surprise me is those attitudes that, we're in 2025 and those stereotypical attitudes still exist. I'm a woman of a certain age, yet I am self-employed. I run my own business. I run a community group. I have employees. I am I'm creating jobs, and here I am considered as somebody who's probably just sat at home having cups of tea and ladies at lunch, right? And that's absolutely crazy that these attitudes still exist. As a small business owner, the economic impact of my diagnosis was absolutely huge. My husband and I run our business, and all of a sudden, he's lost 50% of management. So he's having to not only run the business, but then the emotional toll of watching me go through my diagnosis, taking me to hospital appointments, cooking, cleaning, shopping, all of that. It was that burden on loved ones is absolutely huge. And it is and it's often forgotten. The mental health impact on carers is also forgotten. There were points in my journey when I was so low where, like you say, I was no longer the carer. I was the person being cared for. And mentally, that was a real hard thing for me to have to swallow, because here I was, I'm running my own business, I'm running a community group, I'm working actively in the community, to all of a sudden be bedridden.
Yeah, and so tired and so ill, so tired and
That was
ill.
just such a huge challenge. But
Yeah,
what was even worse was that physically I was just so depleted. I was just broken. Physically and mentally, treatment broke me. There were points where I couldn't even go to the bathroom by myself. I couldn't shower by myself. There were times when I didn't even make it to the bathroom, and I'm there, as the mum, and I'm having to watch my children clear up my mess. That for me was heartbreaking. There were days when I would be in bed and, the family would say, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" I would lie. I would blatantly lie and say, "Yeah, actually, I'm having a good day. I'm doing all right today." Because I couldn't see the pain in their eyes watching me go through what I was going through. That vicious cycle was crazy.
And Sbba, thank you for also mentioning, and it's a really important point. So the impact on caregivers, not just the act of caregiving, but the emotional context of
Yeah.
a loved one with a life-threatening disease who is experiencing, in your case, severe ill health as a result of treatment, actually. But you have to. So, and I feel very strongly. And in the study that we did, one of the studies that was brought in that we used was from maybe a number of years ago, but the needs of women who have had ovarian cancer treatment in relation to the caregiver call or burden are only second to lung cancer patients. So it's treatment for ovarian cancer, and I would not ever want to put anyone off. It's manageable and, you can be supported, but it is complex. It's a complex surgery. It's the treatments, it's cancer treatments. They're harsh. It's not easy for anyone. And so to suddenly become the main caregiver or the family as a caregiving unit, dealing with the caregiving and dealing with their own emotional response to a diagnosis is really, and we do so little anywhere for caregivers, and there's so little recognition
yeah,
of that. And if you took those caregivers away, this is unpaid support. If you
Yeah.
took those caregivers away, what would our states or, what would our communities have to pick up just in terms of that? So it's this unpaid, significant contribution, to women who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And we know it must impact in many kind of different ways on caregivers in terms of their own work that they have. They may, take time out to be a caregiver, or so and I think it goes to this notion that our healthcare systems are struggling with, which is, a diagnosis. An individual has a diagnosis, but actually their journey and their treatment isn't just about their tumor or their cancer in themselves.
it hits far more widely.
It hits far more widely.
Exactly. It is far more widely because if I'm very honest, cancer itself did what it did, but I have long-term conditions now because of the treatments, what chemotherapy has left me with, and the comorbidities that I've developed as a result of treatments, not the cancer, it's the actual treatments themselves. And I mentioned this earlier on, that people around you assume that once you have that, NED, no evidence of disease, you're in remission, that it's all done and dusted and it's over. It's not, because currently I've been just recently diagnosed with small fiber neuropathy, which was a result of chemo, and that is something that the amount of treatment that I now need for that, that just goes on and on. There are other mental health challenges that I still have because my first surgery failed, and that left me with a lot of mental health challenges, having to cope with that. Where you set yourself for this huge surgery. It's like you said, Clara. It's absolute. The impact of it is huge. The recovery is huge, and then for nothing to happen, that was a lot for me to cope with. The trauma that I suffered when I was on oral chemo from that rash has left an indelible mark on me physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I am 2.5 years later, and I'm still working through those mental health challenges. And, there is a lot that goes on post remission, even that
Yes.
that doesn't ever get accounted for or doesn't
Yeah.
ever get taken into consideration.
So even if something is life saving, ultimately, it's always going to be life changing. Just for those people who might be listening or watching who, like myself, aren't fully aware of what surgery actually entails, do you mind just you both mentioned about multiple surgeries that have been involved in your treatment and in various treatments as well. What does the surgery actually entail? Like, what is it for? What is it to remove or to do?
So, in a nutshell, the surgery will be about removing the tumor and as much of that
Right.
the cancerous tissue that may have cancerous cells. But when you sort of think about the anatomy and where your ovaries are, there will often be other kind of internal organs and linings of your uterus, for example, that are implicated. So it's a lot more complicated than, say, doing a lumpectomy for breast cancer or mastectomy.
Yeah.
These are all unpleasant experiences
Right.
anyway, but just to say, and it can be a very long surgery. And so, Sbba, you with personal experience, I'm going to let you speak a little more about your surgery.
So, as I said, my first surgery failed, and that was because the scans I'd had pre-surgery were very different to what my surgeon
Mm.
found when they opened up. The cancer had metastasized and it had spread to the bowel, and that would have meant that if they were to remove as much of it as they could, I would probably have had to have a stoma bag for life. So that was why the difficult decision was made to just remove the fluid that was on the stomach and close back up. When I went for my second surgery, the chemo had shrunk enough of the tumors. I had a full hysterectomy, so absolutely everything went: the ovaries, the womb, the cervix, everything. Because it had spread, I also had a bowel resection. I also had some work done on my duodenum, and I also lost my appendix because it had spread to the appendix. So although it started off just being two growths, one on each ovary, one was 14 centimeters and one was 11 centimeters, you can see that how far it had traveled and how much I ended up actually having to have taken out. And the recovery from that, from my second surgery, they say it's about 8 to 12 weeks. I'd say it probably took me much longer than that.
Mm.
Not the physical part, but the emotional part and the mental health part.
Wow. I mean, it's completely
It's a huge assault on your body. Yeah,
it's mind
yeah.
blowing what you've had to go through and what, as you say, it's not like there's an end point. It carries on and
No.
carries on. And like, I'm just conscious of time. So I feel like we could talk about this all day, which is
We could.
probably what's
I could.
needed. We all need to talk about it more.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sab, I want to, obviously this podcast is called Changing the Ovarian Cancer Story. I wonder if you could change one thing about the ovarian cancer story and go back in time to the beginning of your symptoms, perhaps pre-diagnosis. What would be the one thing that you would change about the ovarian cancer story to make your journey smoother, perhaps?
I think I've said it already. Knowledge
Yeah.
is power, and that awareness. I think there just needs to be a lot more behind targeted awareness, but there needs to be
Yeah.
that there are cultural nuances of certain communities that also need to be considered. But yeah, just ensuring that it has the same amount of funding that many of the other cancers get. Cancer in whatever shape or form is not a fun ride for absolutely anyone, but there are certain cancers that are being left behind, and the outcomes are a lot worse because of the diagnosis being so late. And we just need to ensure that women have that knowledge to be able to be empowered enough to self-advocate, alongside the awareness. That whole empowerment piece needs to be there too, to give the women the confidence that they can advocate for themselves.
And I hope through this podcast as well that we'll perhaps touch more in an expanded way on caregivers, on the community stigma, things like that as well, and of course on awareness through future episodes as well. So everyone, stay tuned for that if you're particularly interested in hearing more about those sorts of elements. One of the things that I want to ask all of our guests through this podcast is what gives you hope for the future. I wouldn't say we've painted a bleak picture of the story so far, but it's certainly a sobering story so far. There will be a lot of people perhaps listening who have maybe just had a diagnosis, just received one, or maybe what their loved one has, and they will be needing hope.
Yeah.
What would you say, Sbba, first to you?
There is hope. Whether it's a drop, whether it's a trickle, or whether it's a river, there is hope. In the last 2.5 years, since I have been in remission, there have been so many advancements. Here in the UK, we've got Professor Ahmed with his vaccine that's on the scenes. There is work going on in Australia that there is around a blood test, and treatments have improved as well within the last couple of years. So the hope that there is traction behind making ovarian cancer a priority is there. What gives me hope is the work that amazing organizations like the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition are doing to take voices from around the globe to come together to amplify the shout, the call out for getting behind women, getting behind the treatments that we need. Fills me with lots of hope. And as I say, whether that's a drop or whether that's a trickle, it's all progress, and that's what matters.
And the drop leads to the trickle, leads to the,
Yeah.
that is precisely the formula. What gives me hope is pretty much the same thing. I've worked for the coalition now for about 8 years. And when I came in, it was before a lot of very important advances were made. So I've kind of seen it, kind of pre and post a little bit. And what gives me hope is I can see the groundswell growing. I can see the commitment, the engagement with women with ovarian cancer, with their families. I see clinicians starting to change or changing their attitude. Some of this is very generational. It does take a long time. Believe me, we put a lot of effort into raising awareness, and sometimes you feel like, is it really making a difference? I believe that it is, and we must continue to do it and do more. But I am encouraged and take great hope from what I see as an engaged, a committed, increasingly a persistent community that doesn't take no for an answer, that says, if you need an economic argument, here's the case we're making for it. If you need to see real people tell you what it's like to be diagnosed with this disease, we can find them for you.
Yeah.
It is a story. This is, as I say, 50% of the world's population is female, and we really, we need to do better in terms of women's health and ovarian cancer. But I see it. I see the seeds being planted.
And I was going to ask you as well, Clara, because I know you mentioned about being with the coalition for the last 8 years. You've spent many, many years working in cancer advocacy as well. And you're stepping down as CEO at the end of this year.
I am.
So your reflections on the past, maybe the many achievements so far, not just the hope for the future.
Yeah, so when I joined the coalition, and I am no way trying to take credit for any of this, it is the movement. I think we had 30 members, 30 advocacy patient groups from around the world who were kind of our members. And today we have 225. And I feel, firstly, that doesn't speak to, us being clever and finding members. What it speaks to is, again, a growing community. And that's where change is driven. I'm very proud of the data that we've generated to really tee up set the table, as they say, for doing more around ovarian cancer, filling advocacy gaps. We have started to work quite closely with organizations like the World Health Organization to see how can we insert ovarian cancer into global initiatives that are already happening around breast and cervical. Why would we not? It's in almost every resource setting, it's the same local resource that we're drawing on. Why would we not include ovarian cancer? So I see all of this happening. And I think, as I exit, but I will always be part of this community in different ways. But as I exit, I'm just proud, and I'm excited for what the next person, that lucky person who's coming into really what is the best job in the world, what they're going to do with it. And I genuinely believe in 3 and maybe 2, 3, 5 years, if we regrouped and had this conversation, I think we'd be talking in, and as you're right, we've talked in sobering terms, but with hope. And I think we will have realized some of that, achievements that are needed, the investment, the attention, the focus that we need.
it's so clear to me and to, I'm sure, everyone listening and watching as well, that you are both brilliant advocates for women's health broadly. And my goodness, we need more like you. So thank you
Yes.
so much for your time today. Do keep up the good work. Thank you also to those of you listening or watching, of course, this podcast, the first in the series of Changing the Ovarian Cancer Story. Any links, any studies that were mentioned today, Clara's mentioned a few, will be listed in the show notes as well, so you can take a look at them there. We would love to hear from you as well with your thoughts on the show. You can email us at podcast@worldovariancancercoalition.org. Please also do like and subscribe the podcast, because that just helps other people know where we are as well. So until next time, keep well. If anything in this podcast has affected you and you would like to speak with someone, you can also contact your local ovarian cancer patient group. To find your nearest ovarian cancer groups by country, please go to partners.worldovariancancercoalition.org.